All right, we are going to be in Matthew chapter 6 today. So if you brought a Bible, meet me in Matthew 6. And if you didn't bring a Bible, there are some paperback ones on the ends of your row, and someone will be glad to slide that down to you. The Gospel of Matthew is the first book in the New Testament, which opens Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which are Gospels. They are accounts of the life and the teaching of Jesus. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 6, and you can also Google it on your smartphone, and someone in the clouds will send one from the clouds to your screen, and you can also track along that way. But I think you'll enjoy being able to read with us. Matthew chapter 6. One day, Jesus was praying, and his disciples were watching him pray. And by now, they had been following him for a while, so they had seen that this was a regular pattern. In fact, if you had followed Jesus around like they did every day, you would conclude that this guy does not have the resources to do life on his own. This guy was obviously not self-sufficient. This was the most needy and dependent person, perhaps, who has ever lived. Because every day, he would set aside time to be alone with someone who he called his heavenly Father. And every time anything significant happened, it happened while he was praying or right after he had prayed. It was as if all this cool stuff that he was doing and all this wisdom he was teaching wasn't coming out of his own inner resources. If you had told Jesus, look within yourself or find yourself, or Jesus, you are enough, he would have laughed at you because he only knew himself in relationship with his heavenly Father. He only knew himself in relationship with someone else. So one day his disciples are watching him pray, and when he has finished, they say, Jesus, can you teach us to do that? Lord, teach us to pray. And it was kind of a strange request because these were Jewish young men who would have grown up praying. In fact, they used some of the same scriptures that we use. But when they watched Jesus pray, they thought, this is different. So they said, Jesus, we don't know what we're doing. And in fact, it's not just that we don't know how to pray. We don't even seem to like it like you seem to like it. Would you teach us to pray? So for the next few weeks, we're just making their request our request. And Jesus answered them with something that has become some of his most famous teaching. It's often referred to as the Lord's Prayer. And it's not an overstatement to say that it might be the most recited words in history, because for 2,000 years, people of many cultures have memorized and prayed these words in their own language. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I met someone who was telling me that he had just in the last year received the Bible in his native language. In the last year, it had been translated into his native language, and he had received a Bible in his native language. And I said, what did you do when you got the Bible in your native language? He said, the first thing I did was I learned the Lord's Prayer in my native tongue. But this prayer was not just meant to be words we recite verbatim. It was intended as a model prayer. It has a pattern and themes that you can follow and put into your own words. So it was meant to teach us to pray in our own words. Now, if you don't call yourself a Christian, this is also a great section of Jesus' teaching to see what Christianity is all about and what it means to follow Jesus. Because in this prayer, Jesus is effectively teaching us how to live life as he lived it. And he's teaching us how to see reality as he saw it. So he's giving us an experiential way of knowing what he was about. You can follow this prayer and experience what Jesus himself experienced. It's a great way to explore Christianity. And so even if you wouldn't call yourself a Christian, we would invite you to try this with us for the next 7 weeks. And as we go through this, we are admitting that many of us, even those of us who have prayed, even those of us who call ourselves Christians, we all run into barriers and frustrations and confusions when we try to pray. And last week we summarized them like this: don't know how to, don't really want to, does it really work? Like, don't know how to. How many of us, if we're honest, don't really know how to talk to a God that we can't see? If you've ever heard Christians pray, and it sounds kind of strange, that's because they probably don't know how to talk to someone they can't see. Sometimes you listen to Christians pray, and you're like, why are they using funny words? And why are they saying just all the time? Like, God, we just this and just this and just this. It's because we don't really know how to talk to a God who we can't see. Or maybe you would say, no, my problem with prayer is really I don't want to. Like sometimes it feels a lot more like something I have to do than something I love to do. I don't love running errands, but I have to go to the grocery store and pick up the dry cleaning and get my pants hemmed and wash the car and stop by the bank and clean the house and wash my socks and underwear. I've got about 10 days supply and get my oil changed. Like I got to do all that stuff just to keep life from falling apart. You can't Instagram any of that stuff. None of that stuff is interesting enough to Instagram. It's kind of boring. I would rather go fishing or go hiking or go skiing. But sometimes prayer feels more like going to the grocery store than going fishing. And some of you might say, does it really work? Because all of us who pray probably have a list of prayers that haven't been answered, or we have a list of prayers that have been answered with no, all of which will sometimes cause us to ask, does this really work? So today we're bringing all of those questions to the start of this famous prayer. Now we have two versions of this prayer in the Gospels. One is in Luke chapter 11, and we looked at it last week in the build up to it, where right before it the disciples say, Lord, teach us to pray. And another version is in Matthew chapter 6. And starting today, we're going to follow the flow from Matthew 6. And to get a sense of the whole, we're just going to read it together to start this out. So if you have a Bible open, read with me starting in Matthew chapter 6, verse 9. Jesus said, pray then like this, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Now today we're just taking the first line, Our Father in heaven. And whatever comes first when you begin to talk with someone or interact with someone is really important because it indicates the basis for the whole interaction. So right here, Jesus is acknowledging something that's always present when two people interact. Sometimes it's explicit, sometimes it's implicit, but it's always there. You approach someone on a certain basis or a certain foundation, and whatever the basis is shapes the nature of your interaction and the exchange. The basis determines what you can and can't say, what you can and can't ask for, how you will and won't act. For example, if you are searching for a job and you're interested in working for a particular company, you intuitively know that it's in your interest to establish as strong a basis before you give them your resume. Like you could send them your resume on the website or just blind email it to someone, but it would be far better if you had a friend or a colleague who introduces you to the president of the company or the hiring manager of the company and says, you should meet my friend because she's great to work with and would do a really good job. I think you would really like meeting her. You're far more likely to get an interview that way, because the basis sets the tone for the whole interaction. Now, you're not just a name on a piece of paper. You're actually so-and-so's friend. And because I trust so-and-so, then our basis is stronger. If you're walking down the street this afternoon, it would be perfectly okay to approach a stranger and ask for time or ask for directions, because we have a basis called our common humanity that makes it socially acceptable to ask almost anyone for time or directions. But if you ask for $100, the answer is probably going to be no, because you don't have the basis for that. Now, if I call a good friend and ask for $100, I'm very likely to get it. If you see someone across the room today and you would like to meet them because you think they're cute, you could walk across the room and ask them to go out with you. That might work if you're really good looking. But it would be more in your interest to try to build a better foundation, a stronger basis. You might see if you have mutual friends who could introduce you. You can stalk them on Facebook and see if you have friends. See, that's what you do when you Facebook stalk. You're trying to establish a stronger basis. So when you start to pray, Jesus says, what's the basis? God is your Father in heaven. Now, right before he started this prayer, he explained why Father is so significant. So back up a couple of verses to verse 7. This was the lead-in in Matthew 6 to the Lord's Prayer. He said, "When you pray, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think they will be heard for their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Pray then like this, our Father in heaven." Now, the word Gentiles there could also be translated pagans. In fact, some translations do translate it pagans. If you're looking at the New International Version, it'll say, "When you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans." I think that's actually a better translation. In our way of talking, a pagan is an irreligious person. Pagans don't care about God or spirituality. They might be immoral or loose-living people. They might be skeptical people or secular people. But in Jesus' day, that's not at all what pagan meant. Pagans were religious and spiritual people. In fact, the term is the term that Jewish people used to refer to the spirituality and the religions of the nations. So notice what's happening here. Jesus is not talking about irreligious people. He's talking about people who do pray, people who pray passionately. They might pray more than you pray. Pagans are spiritual or religious people who pray a lot. And Jesus says, do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Now, it's easy to think he's saying, don't ask for things because God already knows what you need. But in just a few lines, he's going to teach us to ask each day for our daily bread. Some people also read this section and think Jesus is saying, don't ask repeatedly for things because these pagans apparently think they will be heard for their many words. So don't pray over and over and over again for the same thing. But in other places, Jesus teaches his disciples to ask persistently if they need to. Pagan babbling repeated the same word or little phrase over and over and over again because they thought that was the basis, the reason why they would be heard. Now, the question is then, why do you think you will be heard? Why do you think you will be received favorably by the God you pray to? Why do you think there's a possibility that your request will be answered with a yes? Why do you think it is that you'll get a hearing? However you define that is your basis. The pagans, Jesus says, pray on the basis of many words, but people who pray the Jesus way pray on this basis: God is my Father in heaven. So he's contrasting two kinds of people, both of whom pray. He's contrasting people who pray the pagan way versus people who pray our Father. Now, just for clarity, let's call this the pagan way and the Christian way. The term Christian is a little bit anachronistic here, but let's just call it that for clarity's sake. In Jesus' mind, the dividing line in humanity is not so much irreligious people versus religious people. It's religious people and Christians. The real distinction is not people who try to know God versus people who don't care about God. The real distinction in Jesus' mind is how and on what basis people approach him. It's the fundamental assumption they have when they reach out to him and why they think they will be heard. Now, this is different from how we're accustomed to seeing the world. Our tendency is to sort people into irreligious and religious categories, but Jesus sorts people into two different approaches to religion, or two different approaches to spirituality: pagan religion, pagan spirituality, or Christian religion and Christian spirituality. Now, I think Jesus' way of seeing the world explains some things. For example, if the world can be divided into irreligious people versus religious people like we tend to do, how do you explain the fact that most people believe in some sort of God or higher being, or believe that some sort of God might probably exist? How do you explain the fact that most people, regardless of their religion, actually report that they do pray sometimes? Even in a culture like ours where secularism is becoming a more common approach to life, many people would define themselves as nones, meaning they don't have a particular religion or spirituality that they practice. Even nuns doesn't mean I don't believe in God. It just means I don't practice a particular religion or I don't identify with a particular church or denomination. In fact, a study I saw recently on the attitudes of Americans toward prayer, even 30% of self-identified atheists said that they still pray sometimes, just perhaps in case someone's out there. Now, maybe the explanation for this is there's really not a vast divide between people who believe in God and people who don't. It's actually different approaches to God. Now, here's another possibility Jesus is holding out, and I find as a pastor this has great explanatory power. Remember, he's talking to Jewish men. He's talking to men who would not think of themselves as pagans. But he implies that they have a tendency to pray like pagans. He would not have to say, do not heap up empty phrases like the pagans do, if this was not something that they were prone to doing. So he's holding out the possibility that even his disciples might not be approaching God on the basis of our Father. They are praying, but they're praying on a pagan basis. Now, again, I find this very explanatory because I meet people all the time who are religious, who are practicing Christians, who when you drill down, their assumptions about how to know God and how to relate to God and why God's going to answer their prayers or should have answered their prayers are pagan assumptions. So once you see what pagan really means, then even if you're a church person, it's possible that you are one. So, you bunch of pagans, what does it mean to pray, Our Father in heaven? Father-child is a family kind of relationship, and the very opposite of a family relationship is a consumer relationship. Now, the basis of a family relationship is who the person is to you, and the basis of a consumer relationship is what we can do for each other. The basis of a family relationship is a covenant or a kind of binding commitment, and the basis of a consumer relationship is a cost-benefit analysis. Am I able to keep up my end of the deal at a cost that I'm willing to pay? The basis of family is a giving and receiving of persons. In a healthy family relationship, people say, I want you. The basis of a consumer relationship is an exchange of goods and services and money. I want what you have. Now, that doesn't mean that all consumer relationships are cold and calculating and all family relationships are warm and welcoming, right? In fact, the outliers actually prove the paradigm because you could have warm and friendly consumer relationships that nevertheless are still at their foundation consumer relationships. And you could have cold and strained family relationships which nevertheless are still family. For example, I will drive a couple of miles out of my way to go to the dry cleaner because I've come to like the family who owns it. But we still have a consumer relationship because it's an exchange of goods and services. At the core, I want what they do for me. Clean clothes, fair price. If they quit cleaning clothes and start a restaurant or start a dog sitting service, our relationship will be over. Because the basis of our relationship is laundry. Now, I want what you have. If they raise the price from $2 a shirt to $2.50, I would still go see them. But $5 a shirt, I would find another dry cleaners. Because the basis of our relationship is a cost-benefit analysis. For $5 a shirt, I can get that thing delivered to my front door. Even though I've brought them flowers during family deaths and we have warm and friendly relationships, If my credit card is declined over and over and over and over again, they will start refusing me service because the basis of our relationship is, can you hold up your end of the deal, and my end of the deal is to pay for the services rendered. I never remember the day I brought them flowers after they had a bad event in their family, and she was like, "Thank you very much. That'll be $6.50. That's how you know it's a consumer relationship. On the other hand, many of us have family relationships that are less than enjoyable, but we keep them up. If they had done that in any other kind of relationship, you would be out of there because the cost would be too high, but because they're family, you try to endure somehow. She's still my mother. He's still my father. He's still my brother. They're still my child. But here, Jesus is talking about family relationship at its most ideal. Our Father in heaven. When you pray, which basis do you employ? Do you employ a family basis? God is my Father. He'll hear me because I'm His son or His daughter. Or do you employ a pagan basis? I want what He has for me. I can get Him to hear me if I keep up my end of the deal, if I pay the right price, or if I say the magic words and put the right key that unlocks the lock. Now, implicit in these words, our Father, is something that Jesus makes explicit elsewhere in His teaching. And it goes like this. We become God's children in the family covenant sense, not in the created sense, but in the family covenant binding commitment sense, by faith in Jesus. For example, here's John chapter 1, verse 12. Here's how John summarized the life of Jesus. But to all who did receive Him, who believed in His name, He gave the right to become children of God. You hear that? Father, children of God. Here's another example from Paul's teaching in Galatians chapter 3. For in Christ Jesus you are all sons of God through faith. For as many as of you as were baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free. There are no male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. Now, many translations will change you are all sons of God. They will change that to a more gender-neutral term like you are all children of God. And that's often helpful because it helps us see that this is inclusive of men and women, as Paul indicated just a couple of verses later. But I think right here it's better to leave it sons. Something's lost in the generic term children that's there in the term sons. Because in that day, if a man had an estate, but he didn't have an heir, he could adopt a son who became his legal son and the legal heir of his estate. It was a patriarchal society, so estates had to pass to sons. This was never done to women. Estates did not pass to daughters. So if a man did not have a son, he could adopt a son to pass his estates to. So Paul takes a legal institution, which was only for men, and he says, this is what God does for us. In fact, He does it for all Christians without distinctions. You're all sons of God, whether you are Jew or Greek, whether you are slave or free, whether you are male or female, you're all sons of God. Now, to say to a woman, you are a son of God, does not mean, sorry, you've got to learn to think of your discipleship in only male terms and you've got to learn to act like a man. It means that you have all the privileges and the love of an heir to a wealthy patriarch. So Paul continues like this in Galatians chapter 4, just a few verses later. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth His Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law. He's developed a whole theology showing how the law ultimately shows us to be sinful. So He sent forth His Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who are under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. And because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of His Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. Abba was the most intimate Aramaic term, the most simple of Aramaic terms, which kids learn from a little bittiness to call their father. It was a term of intimacy. Abba, Father, so you are no longer a slave, but a son, and if a son, then you are an heir through God. So adoption was a change of status, or we could say it like this: it was a change of basis. Before the patriarch adopted the son, he might have known the son in some fashion. He might have had some dealing with him. But when he adopted the young man to be his son, the whole basis of their relationship changes. Because basis changes, the son now has access to things that he didn't have access to before. He is an heir to all the Father's wealth. He's also loved by the Father, just as a natural-born son would have been loved by his Father, which is probably why Jesus prayed in John chapter 17, "Father, may you love them with the with which you have loved me." So here's what's included in our Father in heaven. There's two ways to come to God, a pagan way and a Christian way. And when you come to God the Christian way, you come on the basis of sonship. You come on a family basis, which is the very opposite of a consumer basis, because you have been adopted as God's children. He's now your father, and all that fatherhood means is yours. You are an heir of a really, really, really wealthy patriarch. You are loved in the same way Jesus is loved by the Father. And how much does the Father love Jesus? You are accepted as you are, not on the basis of your performance, because it's not a consumer relationship. He adopts you before you learn how to keep up your end of the deal. Now, what does that mean for prayer? Well, let's answer that by applying it to our prayer barriers. Don't know how to, don't want to, does it really work? Let's take them in reverse order. Does it really work? How do you deal with the common experience that some of our prayers are not answered, or they're answered no? What do you do when your prayers aren't answered? How you react to unanswered prayer is a great indicator of whether you are relating to God the pagan way or the Christian way. Here's what Jesus said in verse 7 again. "When you pray, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think they will be heard for their many words." Many words in Greek, the little term, had a tinge or a character of anxiety to it. Anxious words. Jesus is saying here, here's how you know pagan prayer, it's anxious. It's a, why aren't you hearing me? I need to be heard. Maybe I haven't said the thing right to be heard right. Maybe I haven't said it enough times. So if your prayers aren't answered, a consumer will be anxious for one of two reasons. Now, there's two reasons to be anxious. Remember, a consumer relationship involves two sides. You do your part, I do my part. I hold up my end of the deal, you hold up your end of the deal. So you could be anxious because you're insecure, which is, I haven't been keeping up my end of the deal. My credit keeps getting declined. I don't have enough in the bank. I need to try harder. I need to do better. Maybe there's something wrong with my prayer. Maybe I haven't asked the right way. Maybe there's something wrong with my life. So my credit keeps getting declined. You could be really insecure. Unanswered prayer makes us insecure sometimes. Or you could be cold and angry, which is, I have been keeping up my end of the deal, but God, you're not keeping up your end of the deal. Look at all the ways I've served you. Look at all I've done for your kingdom. Look at how much I've tried to obey you. So insecurity and anger are both the anxiousness that can come into a consumer relationship. Jesus says this is typical of pagan prayer. The pagan religious person says, God, let's make a deal. I want what you have. I need your blessing, so I'll serve you. I'll keep your word if you'll bless me. It's possible to be very obedient and religious and pagan. Do you remember one of Jesus' most famous parables? It's sometimes called the parable of the prodigal son. It's really a parable about two sons. A father has two sons. And this is a wealthy father. So both of these sons are heir to a wealthy estate. And the younger son says, Father, I want my inheritance now. And he takes his inheritance and he runs off into a far country and he squanders his inheritance on wild rebellion. The older son stays home and he serves his father faithfully. He's dutiful and obedient. But one day the younger son comes to his senses and he comes back and he wants to come back and establish a consumer relationship with his father. He says, Father, I'll come and I'll be your servant if I can just have something to eat. We'll have a fair exchange here. And the father says, no, you're my son. And he lavishes his love on him and restores him as a son in the family. And the older son, the dutiful, obedient one, becomes angry. He says, you've never done this for me. That's not fair. All these years I've served you. Even though he was very religious and obedient, he was a pagan because he didn't want the Father. He wanted what the Father had. On the other hand, if you have come to know God as your Father in heaven and your prayer is answered no, you will be sad. You'll be disappointed. You might not understand. You might be confused. But your soul still trusts. It says, I can't see all the whys and the hows and the what ifs, but my Father has a plan and my Father loves me. So I stay in relationship. I keep on praying. Now here's the second problem. What if I don't really want to pray? Again, this consumer or family diagnosis can be very helpful because if prayer feels like running errands, if it feels like going to the grocery store, if it feels like reading your list, like I got to go to the store, I got to read my list, and someone's going to come and fill the cart up and then I'm going to leave. And that's kind of boring, but I have to do it because I need this to get on with life. You might not have ever experienced the kind of prayer that Jesus is talking about here. I love being with my family. I enjoy time with my family. When I went home for Christmas, I knew that lots of good economic exchange was awaiting me. How do I put this in good terms? I get more out of Christmas than I put into it because my parents are very generous. So whatever I spend buying gifts for the family, I get back more in economic value that my parents buy for me. But that's not at all why I wanted to go home for Christmas. That's why little kids want to go to Christmas. That's not why I wanted to go to Christmas. I wanted to go to Christmas because I enjoy being with my family. In fact, if it was just economic exchange, we could have gotten that done another way because most of my economic exchange comes in the form of gift cards, which can be emailed. In fact, I had to remind my mom this year that she still owes me $200 from last Christmas. And see, we could have gotten that fixed without me going all the way halfway across the country to see them. We could have gotten that fixed through text message and email. But I want to be with my family. I enjoy a week in their presence. 6 days anyway. About the seventh day, I'm like, okay, there's a lot of kids in this house. Let's go home. And I enjoy those kids. I enjoy conversations with my father. I enjoy time with my family. So notice what happens when we learn to pray our Father. There's warmth, and there's love, and there's intimacy. You want to spend time with your Father, which might explain why Jesus was able to pray like Jesus prayed. Now, last problem. Don't know how to. Jesus is actually being very practical here. He says, when you start to pray, don't rush in with your list of things. I mean, that's coming in verse 11. Give us this day our daily bread. God wants you to come to him with his request. Jesus wants to teach us. Do that. But first he says, get in mind, God is my Father. You might need to spend some time when you start to pray, hanging out there, God is my Father. I have a friend who I really enjoy praying with Because almost every time he prays, he doesn't start by asking for a lot of things. He starts by just remembering who God is. He starts by thanking God for his love. He starts by naming specific ways that he has seen and he has experienced his Father's love. So you find that when you pray with him, suddenly you become warm to prayer. It quickly becomes like, okay, we got to pray too. This is really fun. Some of you are going to need to learn the art of meditation, which will flow through several of these themes. Now, in lots of spiritualities, meditation is emptying your mind, often through repeating some simple phrase or word over and over again to kind of get my mind empty, get whatever is within me out. And that has some value because often there's a lot of noise in our heads when we start to pray. There's a lot of things we're thinking about. There's a lot of anxieties. There's a lot of noise. We need to get that out. But in Christian prayer, meditation is not just emptying yourself. It's filling your mind and filling your heart with something. Meditation takes your mind thinking on something. It takes your heart receiving something. It takes stuff coming in from outside. It's filling your mind with God's truth. It's looking at what he says in his word and letting it fill your mind and your heart. So Jesus says, when you start to pray, be filled with this. God is my Father. He's adopted me. He's a wealthy Father. He's a loving Father. I've experienced some of his love and his wealth in these particular ways. You ought to be able to take love as a general term and point it down into specifics of your life. You ought to be able to take wealthy Father as a big general term and point it into specifics of your life. Or you could meditate on this. The one time we know that Jesus prayed and the answer was no, and he had to bring his heart into alignment with no, is told to us at the end of this Gospel of Matthew in chapter 26. It goes like this. Jesus went with them, his disciples, to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And taking with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. And then he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me." Watch is often how Jesus described praying, watching in prayer, looking for God's answer, staying awake and looking for something. Remain here and watch with me. Going a little further, he fell on his face and he prayed, saying, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me." That's the request. "Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." How is he able to bring his heart into alignment? My Father. He continues. He came to the disciples and he found them sleeping, because that's what happened when Jesus prayed a lot. The disciples had trouble staying awake, as we all do. And he said to Peter, "So could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation." In fact, that's one of the things that he had taught them in Matthew 6 to pray for. Pray that we don't lead us not into temptation, but Peter had forgotten that. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So, leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the third time, saying the same words again. And then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Sleep and take your rest later on. See, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." And that is how we became adopted sons and daughters of God. When Jesus prayed, through prayer and through Jesus knowing the love of the Father, even when the answer was no, made possible for you and 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 you to be a child of God. So, let's practice now praying like he taught us to pray. Would you pray with me? Our Father, you are a Father who absolutely loves us, and we know it because you paid the most incredible price by sending your own beloved, natural, eternal Son. You sent him to die for us so we can be assured of your love for us. And Father, so many of us in this room have specific instances of your love for us and how it's been displayed even in the last week, even in the last 2 weeks, even in the last year. We have tangible things we can point to as proof that you love us. So we think about those now and we bring those to mind now. And none of them are as extraordinary as the sacrifice of your Son, but all of them flow from the sacrifice of your Son as tangible gifts of your love for us. And so we think about them now. And Father, you are really, really, really wealthy. We're glad that a really wealthy Father adopted us. You are really wealthy. And because you're really wealthy, we know we can trust you with all of our little needs. And so help our hearts even now as we have anxieties about particular needs. Help our hearts to just rest in the fact that we have a really rich dad. And help us to rest in the fact that this dad has given us the right to call him Daddy. And so we thank you for your love to us. And Father, I want to pray right now for those who would love to be adopted as your sons or daughters. Father, I pray that they would just come to you now and simply say, I want to know you not as just my creator, not just as the God who can do a couple of things for me if I need some help in a pinch, but I want to know you as a son. I want to know you as a daughter. I want to know you as my Father. And so I thank you for the love of your Son, Jesus, who you sent for us. I need his death for me. I need his resurrection to give me life. I need his Spirit to be poured into me. And so, Father, would you do that for me now in his name? We pray all of this in his name and by his Spirit. Amen.